Sometimes you'll get the feedback of, well, here's like the magic question, as if 7 words said correctly in the right way is the potion to, cure all your ills and take care of everything for the client. So I wish I knew how I came across motivational interviewing. Like I said, I go to the Kitsis blog all the time. I'm listening on the podcast. So somehow it popped up, the idea of motivational interviewing. And that just really hit a chord with me. Finally, here's a process I could learn to guide people through a conversation towards change. That's what motivational interviewing is. It's having a guided conversation on helping someone believe they can change something.
Welcome, Model FAs. David DeSell here, president of Model FA and your host of the Model FA podcast. And we have Jeremy Keil here, who is one of you. He is an advisor. He manages over 150 or so client relationships, over $100 million in assets, and he is a retirement-focused planner. So we're going to spend some time today learning about Jeremy's background. We're going to be learning about also the idea of what he refers to as motivational interviewing, going deep into that topic. So, with that being said, I also want to say a thank you. We were actually kind of reintroduced recently by Jennifer Hensley, who is also a fantastic marketing consultant and coach in the industry. So if you haven't checked her out, we have an episode with her as well. And if you just Google her name, you'll find her, but she's fantastic. So Jennifer, if you're listening to this episode, thank you for reintroducing Jeremy and I. And with that being said, Jeremy, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on, David.
Of course. So how'd you get started in the industry? Was this kind of your first career, or did you do something before? If it was something else, what was that? Help us kind of go back to the beginning so we can get an idea of how you got started.
Yeah, it's basically my first career. When I was growing up, I loved doing those math logic puzzles. Like I just loved putting together puzzles. I was good at math. And then later on, my aunt, who worked in the financial services industry, she said, you love helping people and you're good at math. You should become a financial advisor. And so next thing I know, I'm talking to a general agent at the time. And next thing I know, I'm helping people with life insurance, fixed annuities, mutual funds, all kinds of good stuff, and just learned more and more about retirement planning specifically. I figure retirement planning is like doing a puzzle because there's so many pieces and you're just putting it all together. So it just kind of takes you back to the things I like to do.
Awesome. And are you still at that general agency? Have you branched off in any way, shape, or form? Like what's been your career progression since that point?
Yeah, basically I'm in Milwaukee area. And so I'm part of Thrivent Financial. That's who I started with. Years upon years, similar to Northwestern Mutual, which is maybe more famous nationwide. But what Thrivent did, which is so great, is they took a lot of their advisors that are all planning and RIA kind of focused to begin with, and they stood up their own corporate RIA. So now I've got my own business, my own entity, but I'm a part of their corporate RIA and just use their platform so that I can work with my clients, do the things I want to do, run my business the way I want. But at the same time, I don't have to deal with compliance or technology. They've got the corporate RIA.
How long have you been in business in the industry? We didn't talk about that on our intro call.
Yeah, by the time this comes out, it might be 20 years. It was summer of 2003 when I started. Yeah.
Very nice. Very nice. And I guess if you can think back to the very beginning of your career, those are usually, the career is tough in general, but those are usually the toughest years. How'd you get your business off the ground initially? How'd you get your first few clients? Like, what were some of the things that you were focused on? And do you still do those things, or have they morphed into something else, in today's day and age?
Yeah, I was just going on my unique ability, which I was 22, just out of college. Thankfully, I was pretty good at taking tests and learning things and book learning. Some people aren't, and that's great. That's fine. But I was in a new area, knew nothing at all about sales. And so all I did is dived headfirst into the CFP curriculum, CHFC, CLU, anything I could do to learn more. And then I talked to as many of the veteran advisors as I could and say, hey, did you know this? And half the time they didn't because they were busy talking to their clients. I had no clients. I was just learning. And so a few of the agents, few of the advisors that are around for a while, they said, wait a second, you told me about this one thing. I've got a couple clients that it might apply to. So they would bring me on as like a 23, 24-year-old. And I said I would talk spreadsheet with them. Like I'd look at their clients' info and run a spreadsheet and say, hey, this is really the way you ought to look at things. And so my unique ability was diving in, learning the financial picture. And in that case, I was explaining it to the advisors and was able to come in on some enough cases to keep me around at the time. Now I do a lot of education through webinars and talking to the clients that I have right now.
That's cool. So for everyone listening, I want to kind of emphasize that point. So everyone is going to have a different and sort of unique skill set. And perhaps that's going out to networking events and being, that connector style personality that just compels, people to want to meet with you. Maybe it's more of the analytical side where, and I say this in a positive way, where you just kind of nerd out on spreadsheets and learning and, finding someone that, has a complementary skill set to you that can kind of fill your gaps and you could fill their gaps. Rising tides raises all boats, so to speak. So it's interesting because I feel like, because I was at Northwestern for 7 years, and I say this generally speaking, obviously there's plenty of exceptions, but to be successful at Northwestern in the beginning stages, typically you need to have a knack for sales and a knack for talking with people. And I feel like there's a lot of folks that maybe could be great advisors, but the system that's in place for them may discourage them from staying in the industry because they're like, well, I'm not good at sales, so I can't do this. But I think your story, Jeremy, proves that you can make it if you approach it the right way and you find folks that perhaps do have that sales acumen already. They can learn from you. In turn, of course, you're learning from them to build up that skill set. But as you put it, there was enough of those interactions that kept you around in the business to get you to where you are today, over 100 million in assets and, serving over 150 families, which is fantastic. So I just want to emphasize that point because oftentimes we, if there's a square peg going in the round hole, we're like, oh, okay, well, I guess I'm not a fit for this. But in reality, you just, haven't found that right setup yet.
You get it.
So talk to me about the idea of motivational interviewing. When we were talking on our intro call, that was super intriguing to me because I feel like, oftentimes I hear, someone call the meeting a discovery meeting or, a fact finder or just an initial conversation or consultation. And I hadn't heard of anyone using the phrase motivational interviewing. So I'm super intrigued to learn more. I know we only kind of grazed the surface when we talked previously, but what's the deal with motivational interviewing? And is it throughout the process? Is it just in that initial meeting with them? How do you kind of structure integrating that process into the process that you're bringing them through?
Yeah, it started because I've had 20 years of experience, not just as an advisor, but as an advisor going to advisor conferences. And pretty much everyone gets up on that stage and says the key to success is to ask good questions. And there's a huge pause. Like, tell me how to ask good questions. And sometimes you'll get the feedback of, well, here's like the magic question, as if 7 words said correctly in the right way is the potion to, cure all your ills and take care of everything for the client. So I wish I knew how I came across motivational interviewing. Like I said, I go to the Kitsis blog all the time. I'm listening on the podcast. So somehow it popped up, the idea of motivational interviewing. And that just really hit a chord with me of finally, here's a process I could learn to guide people through a conversation towards change. That's what motivational interviewing is. It's having a guided conversation on helping someone believe they can change something. It started 40 years ago or so with alcohol and drug abuse counselors, where oftentimes a court tells somebody, you've got a problem, you've got to go to a counselor. And for some reason, back in the 70s or so, the thought was, if we just get people to admit they have a problem that everyone else can see, then that's the key to the solution. And a few counselors, a few therapists at the time realized maybe telling someone they're wrong is not the way to go. And they started researching, discovering, trying to figure out a process to interact with clients to figure out what are their goals and values and how do we actually help align their behavior to do that. And so I've just been a studier, a student of motivational interviewing the last 3 or 4 years. I've taken basic courses, intermediate courses, kind of do refreshers for myself so that I've always got that ability and trying to get better at just having conversations with clients or prospects about changes they want to make. And yes, it does start in that first meeting. In the health world and the motivational interviewing world, they call it an intake. And that's kind of what it is. If you've ever been to a doctor or a psychotherapist, they do an intake and they're just trying to figure out the base case of where things are at and where you want it to go, or where maybe the court ordered you to go at that time. And that's what we're doing as advisors. Is somebody showed up in your door for some reason, and it's not always exactly the reason that they stated, or if it is, there's kind of underlying things behind it. And your job is to help them get that thing, whatever it is. And the first change a prospect walking your door might be asking you to help them make is find a new advisor. And so that is maybe the starting point with prospects, but there's all kinds of things that happen afterwards where they're trying to make decisions. Clients are trying to make decisions about their money. And if you can help them make good decisions about their money and help them stick to their decisions, I mean, you're doing a great job then.
So there's a lot in there, and I want to start to kind of peel back the onion. One thing I want to make mention of, and we'll get to this part later on in the podcast, but for those of you who are listening, if this isn't the first episode you are listening to, you know that one of the questions that I ask all of our guests is a book that's had an impact on them. And what Jeremy just mentioned is he's taking principles and guidance from a totally unrelated industry, taking those principles and applying them to this space. And that's part of the reason why I always ask guests, what is a book that's had an impact on them? Because I find a lot of folks, like you did early on in your career, at least in the example that you shared, put their nose in books that are related to our industry, whether it be studying for designations or, just reading books that are directly related to the financial services industry. Whereas there's so many golden nuggets outside of our industry that we can in turn apply to what we do on a day-to-day basis. So how I want to peel back the onion, and, we didn't talk about this in advance, so I'm kind of putting you on the spot, Jeremy, but I'm sure part of motivational interviewing involves just genuinely being curious about the person that you're sitting across from. Like I used to over prepare for these podcasts and script out all my questions. And now what I do is I just get a sense of the topic that we're going to talk about. And I come in genuinely curious and see how it goes. Right. And it tends to come out well. But I'm sure that there's some staple questions that you try to weave in. And of course, asking follow-up questions along the way. Walk me through if you can. And again, I'm putting you on the spot, but walk me through if you can, what are some of those questions that you weave into the process that advisors who are listening can write down and start to integrate into what they're doing?
Yeah, there's a good number of them. I'll pull some that I have up to begin with on there. But if you don't mind, could we start first with just kind of talking about some background of just how do you approach? You mentioned how you approach with a spirit of curiosity. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of ways to just approach the conversation that if you don't use particular questions, right, it's just the style, it's the spirit of it that really gets you 90% of the way there.
Yep, let's rock.
Yeah, one part of it is the thought that you and the client are in a mutual relationship where you are the guide, where you may be the expert in your field, but the client's actually the expert on themselves. Like they know what actually works for them. And the easiest examples are things like dieting or quitting smoking, things like that. But if you knew everything in the world about why you should tell someone or why someone should quit smoking and go eat better and go exercise, you have no idea what the person you're telling that to has tried before, what has worked for them before, what has not worked for them before. And so you might be the expert in your field of student loan planning or whole life insurance with dividends or retirement planning, whatever it is. You don't know what their experience is to begin with. You don't know what they've tried before. You don't know necessarily what they're looking for. And so you should come in with a style and have a spirit about yourself, where the acronym within motivational interviewing is PACE, P-A-C-E, where it's partnership. This is a partnership. You're working on this together. It's acceptance. I think a lot of times clients are afraid to go into a financial advisor's office because they just assume he's going to ask me about the budget and tell me how I spend everything wrong, right? You've got to have an acceptance of whatever it is that they're walking in with. If they have the world's worst variable universal life in front of them, if they have the world's worst spending habits, that's where they're at. You just got to accept where they're at. Have some compassion, care about them specifically. It's not about the sale. It's about that client, about that person and their situation. And then having some empathy too, which is different from compassion, because empathy is just trying to understand from someone else's experience, their own situation, where they might be making a decision with their Social Security, with their pension, with their money for a reason, because their dad died at 65 and they're turning 65 next year. So while mathematically everything they're telling you about how they want to do their retirement is completely wrong, you got to have some empathy for why they're coming to that conclusion. That's the first part of it. It's just that's kind of the spirit of it. And as far as what you do, there's a few things. I think they're working on an acronym. They haven't found one for 40 years now, but it's express empathy. Not just have empathy, but express it, right? If somebody says, I'm retiring next year because my dad died at 65 and I just turned 64, my goodness, that's hard to deal with. And I can imagine how you approaching that birthday is putting a lot of emotion into what you want to do with your retirement. You just expressed empathy. Support self-efficacy. I think sometimes advisors want to feel like they're the expert and no one can do anything without them, but people still got to go and they got to move their money left and right? They still got to say yes. They still got to sign the forms. They still got to go down to Social Security and file for things, right? Support their ability to go do things on their own, right? That's a huge thing. Another thing is rolling with resistance. Sometimes people walk in your door and they say, this is what I want and this is what I'm going to do. And you're thinking you're completely wrong, right? If you tell them they're wrong, you're not going to get anywhere with it. You can just kind of roll with it and say, I see you put some effort into your thoughts and you really want to make sure you're getting the best thing with your money, right? Just kind of roll with what they're starting out with. The description is you're not wrestling with somebody when they walk in your door, you're more dancing, right? Mm. And there's got to be a little bit of tension there. Otherwise, your dancing partner doesn't realize what you want to do. You're kind of like talking it away through that slight amount of tension, but you're also, you're not wrestling. You're not trying to overthrow somebody. Sometimes you need to develop discrepancy, which is someone might walk in your door and say, my wife wants me to get a financial advisor. I'm not sure it's going to matter. Like they don't really care if they hire a financial advisor or not. There's some sort of ambivalence there where you got to explore that, where having a financial advisor or not having a financial advisor is an actual choice and is an actual difference. And sometimes you need to almost widen that gulf between both sides of having an advisor and not, or taking Social Security at 62 or 70. Like you almost have to create a clear choice in their mind because they believe, and a lot of people believe this about a lot of things. What does it matter, right? It all kind of evens out in the end. If I quit smoking or not, if I do the diet or not, if I do the lump sum pension or take the monthly amount, it all kind of works out, right? There's this ambivalence there sometimes that you need to explore and perhaps almost just develop a discrepancy between two clear choices. So that's kind of a bit of a background of how you approach motivational interviewing. And I'm sure you'll have links to it, but anyone that wants to learn more, I'm not an expert, I'm just a student. And I love sharing the idea that if you are interested in helping clients make positive changes in their financial life, you should get trained in how to do that just as much as you learned about Roth IRAs and who knows, everything else that's out there, right?
And did you get trained specifically, or are there like books or resources that talk about this that you can share? That way they can write it down on their end as well?
Yeah, there's like a 600-page motivational interviewing textbook. And if you Google it, you'll find out things like that. But I just encourage you, go to motivationalinterviewing.org and look for a training. There's Zoom trainings that are anywhere in the world you can take. It's like $100. Spend 3 hours, spend 4 hours, spend 6 hours learning how do you have conversations with your prospects? How do you have conversations with your clients to help them get what it is that they want to have?
Yeah, I think a couple of things I want to add on to that, Jeremy. One is I like how you shared that in just like an organized fashion, as opposed to, one of the things that you alluded to. And I just pulled up the motivational interviewing website here. Just make sure I'm looking at the right one. Their acronym is MINT, Excellence in Motivational Interviewing. Is that the correct one?
That's the one. Yep.
Okay, cool. As you mentioned earlier, with when folks get up on stage and they're like, hey, the key to success, with clients is to ask great questions, but they kind of stay surface level. You came prepared with a very organized overview of just the mentality and the reason why you want to approach conversations like this. So I appreciate that.
You got it.
The other thing that I want to do is just go a little bit deeper. I know you mentioned that you pulled up some questions. And rather than sharing, unless you would like, rather than sharing like exactly where in the process you bring this stuff up, perhaps let's go through like a punch list of questions that you try to weave in throughout the conversation. And before you do that, because I'm kind of all over the place at the moment, I forgot that I wanted to share something. It's one thing to get trained, as Jeremy is saying, and I think that that is an excellent first step. It's another thing to actually spend time practicing and role playing these conversations. So whether it's, someone else in your office, a spouse, a friend, a family member, someone within the Model FA community, or someone, within the XY community, if you're a part of that, regardless of where you find these people, especially within the community, they're probably going to need some help in role playing as well, whether that's about motivational interviewing or something else. So just make sure that you're spending the time practicing in advance of doing this with the client, because that's going to, take care of two things. One, it's going to increase your confidence when you deliver this live, for the first time with the client. And also, you can hear something and you can think about something, but there's a lot that happens from your mind to your mouth when you go to say something for the first time that you just spent time learning. So make sure you go through that process and refine your language, before you weave this into actual prospect and client conversation. So with that said, Jeremy, what are some questions that you tend to weave into conversations with folks?
Yeah, and I'll say a lot of times when I'm talking through questions, it seems like the natural fit for an advisor. Just think about when you're meeting somebody for the first time, which is good because you're setting the stage for we are a partnership. We are working together. I'm trying to figure out what you're looking for, and we're going to help you throughout your life with that. But it's not just how do you meet a prospect? It's not just how do you make a sale, right? It's how you approach conversations with the clients throughout. So I'll talk through with some of those kind of prospecting, first time you're meeting somebody questions, and then maybe some other questions later on. But usually people walk in the door and they've got a thought in their mind, right? Just ask them, what brings you here today? Right? I mean, you got to start somewhere, but you want an open-ended question. That is a key skill. You need to have open-ended questions. And usually they'll say something like, oh, I need help with my finances. I need to decide what to do with my pension. Well, my next follow-up question is usually, what prompted you to look right now? There's a trigger. It's not like today's the day I needed to look at my finances. There's probably some sort of trigger. And if you ask them what the trigger is, they'll tell you. So what prompted you looking right now? Oh, well, I got this form from my company. I need to make a decision in 30 days, and I got it 28 days ago, right? There's things that show up. Oh, open enrollment ends tomorrow, right? There's a lot of things. There's an actual trigger, and that will tell you a bit about what their mindset is of what got them into your office, and also what really is urgent to them, because sometimes you need to take care of the urgent first so that you can complete them through the other process. Another question is, well, what have you done so far? Right? They've probably done something. I've done a lot of research. I've met with 7 other advisors. They've done things already before they get in your door. And it's nice to know what they've done. It gives you a feel for their experience ahead of time. Or sometimes, especially for me, I'm focused on retirement, and it's a lot of one-time decisions. Social Security is basically a one-time decision. Pensions are definitely a one-time decision. You can never change it. But they're asking you your opinion, and it's nice to know where they're coming from. What would you have done with your Social Security if we weren't talking? And they'll tell you, well, I would take it at 62. Or I was going to wait, but I'm not sure how long, right? They're going to tell you which direction that you are heading to, right? These are all things that are just building the picture of what it is they're looking for, what they would have done, what are their pain points. You can ask them, what have I done so far? Well, I met with 5 other advisors. Well, what did you like about some of the advisors? They'll tell you, well, this one person, they really listened to me. This other person, all they wanted to do is look at my statements and manage my money, right? They'll tell you things that they like and don't like if you ask them about it, right? So that's part of the questions. But what I want to say about the questions too is there's very specific skills that motivational interviewing teaches you. They have an acronym for that as well, which is great. OARS, OARS, open-ended questions, affirmations, reflections, and summaries. And what's great about that is I thought interviewing someone, connecting with someone, asking questions was about asking questions. Well, of the 4 skills, only one of them is actually asking questions. And just imagine if your spouse walks in the door today and you ask them 30 questions in a row about their day and what their plans are and what they're going to do and what they want for dinner. Like, a lot of questions is not really having a conversation, but you want to build people up and you want to make sure that you understand what it is they're talking about and that they know you understand what it is talking about. So if somebody says, I'm looking to decide what to do with my pension, because you ask them a good open-ended question, you can affirm them and say, well, it looks like you're doing a lot of research on it, right? That's an affirmation because they were doing a lot of research. Good for you for recognizing that. And they might say, yeah, I've been looking for what to do. I've read all these places. I can't figure out. I just want to do the right thing. And you can reflect. You can say, you've been trying really hard to figure out the right thing. It's just tough to get all the right advice and know what's the best thing for you. And they're going to say, yeah, that's right. And now you understood actually what they're looking for. And they know that you understood what they're looking for. And these are just skills that you can keep on doing throughout the first time you meet them, the second time you meet them, the 200th time that you meet them.
So I love all that. And I appreciate you going through it. And if you heard me typing on my end, I was like, okay, I want to, start writing these down, for myself as well.
I'll send you all my notes. All my notes, David.
Cool. I appreciate that. And the thing that you just kind of ended with resonates a lot, which is not just asking a question to get an answer, but seeking to understand and ensure that your understanding of their answer is actually accurate. Because they may say something, and even though you hear the words that they say, you may interpret that as something different than what they intended. So, you could say, something back to them, hey, if I'm understanding you correctly, what I'm hearing is fill in the blank. And they may respond and say, well, no, actually, it's more like, and then you get the real answer, right? Whatever that is. Yep. So there's, when you come back and present the financial plan to them, you are doing so knowing that you got absolutely any and all information that you need. And I'm willing to bet too, especially if these meetings are in person and not just over the phone, or even if they're on Zoom, you can probably see someone have at least some degree of a wall up when they first meet you. And I'm willing to bet that by the second question, you visibly see their body change and they become more relaxed and they, divulge more information and they feel more comfortable. Would you agree that that's the case?
Yeah, definitely. And I'll speak to that really quickly is that we have in our office, there's a Kitsis article about how to set up your office, basically like a therapist's office. I copied and pasted. Literally, it's the exact diagram of everything. I've got the rug. I've got the noise machine, that kind of the white noise machine. My prospective clients sit in chairs with arms and I don't. So like it's putting them in kind of a position of power. Like people walk in your door feeling unsure. Like, who is this person and how are they going to take my money away from me? Right. That's kind of their thoughts. And when you empower them and you continue empowering them throughout, like they'll feel the tagline for my podcast, our podcast is Retirement Revealed. It's you'll feel the more you know about your money, the better you'll feel about your money and you'll make better money decisions. Right? We're here to educate people. And it's not just education. You got to feel better about your knowledge. When you have the knowledge and you feel better about your knowledge, you're going to make better decisions. And so setting up the whole experience to help people do that, to help people learn and feel confident, just helps them out.
So another thing that I want to kind of put you on the spot on, so feel free to take a moment to think about this. But if I were a betting man, I would bet that when you get a client referral to come into the office, rarely, again, I would guess that the client is saying, oh, well, Jeremy and his team, helped us with our pension and helped us, with Roth conversions, helped us with our risk management and kind of a bullet point list of the things that you accomplished. I'm willing to bet that they talk more about the emotional experience and the relational experience that they've had with you. What's one of the, I guess, best kind of compliments that you've got or that you've heard that wasn't planning related, but more relational or emotional related when you ask someone, hey, so what did John share, about the work that we do in advance of this relationship? I'm just curious to see how the client interprets the experience and how they articulate that to that person they're referring.
Yeah, interesting enough about that is actually our referral rate tripled when we started the podcast. I'm not sure it's referral rate. Like if you looked at the percentage of clients that said, oh, I told somebody to call Jeremy, Well, now you should check out my advisor's podcast. We've had people say they'll put on our calendar because people can book on our website and it'll say, how were you referred to us and or introduced to us? I think it says, but people will say, I was referred to your podcast. They don't say, Jim told me to call you. It says, I was referred to your podcast. So they get this introduction of us talking about money in a calm, empowering type of way. And they like that to begin with. But the best compliment to answer your question that people will tell us, which happens thankfully frequently, is after the first hour of talking with a brand new person we never met with before, they'll tell us that I learned more in the last hour than I've ever learned in the 5 years I worked with my previous advisor. And I love that. That just makes me realize that I'm on the right track and that we're doing the right things to help people learn about their money and make better money decisions.
That's awesome. I want to go off script a little bit because with your podcast, and what's the exact name of the podcast if others want to check it out?
Yeah, it's Retirement Revealed.
Retirement Revealed. So definitely go check that out. I know there's a lot of advisors who either have a podcast or are thinking about a podcast, and go check out Jeremy's to see kind of how he formats it and what that's all about. But I want to go down that path for a moment. And you had mentioned your referral rate increasing, and we help advisors with their podcast. Like we do all the, editing and fulfillment and the posting and all that type of stuff, help them scope out the show, the design of, the album cover art and help them come up with a name. We do all that stuff. And sometimes it's difficult to be able to share and articulate the value of a podcast, but you just kind of hit on it. So I want to lean into it a bit, where it's a heck of a lot easier for a client to refer someone to your podcast than it is necessarily to put them in a joint email with you, because maybe that, friend of theirs doesn't know if they actually want to meet, but they want to kind of like test you out first. And that's totally fair. But the benefit to that is if they listen to your podcast, Jeremy, and I'm sure that there's been some people that listen to your podcast, as there's been some people that listen to our podcast, where the message doesn't resonate and they decide to not reach out to us. And if that's the case, cool, right? We probably wouldn't have, worked out anyways. But the people that do listen to it, where it does resonate, that do reach out, I would imagine your closing ratio to where you can actually have a personal impact on them is through the roof, because they've already kind of made up their decision. Otherwise, they wouldn't have reached out. Do you find that to be the case when someone comes in from the podcast? It's sort of a done deal that you're going to be able to help them, assuming that they're qualified, of course.
Yeah. So I'll tell you about the first time I just dropped my podcast, right? It's released for the first time ever. It was on a Wednesday. On a Thursday, I got a lead, and it was somebody who was let go from her job. So I call her up. She tells me she's in marketing. I said, we book an appointment for Monday because she just got let go. She's got all the time in the world and she wants to get this taken care of. And I said, hey, you're in marketing. Do me a favor. I just released my podcast yesterday. I'll send you a link. Do you mind listening to that and just give me some feedback on how I did? What do you think? So she comes in Monday and she said, I listened to your podcast over the weekend, and quick hint is you should always have like 3 or 4 or 5 podcasts that you release immediately at the first point. You don't release one podcast because people will like it and then they'll want more and they'll be disappointed. So I had 3 podcasts released on the same exact day on that Wednesday. So she comes in on Monday. She said, I listened to all 3 of your podcasts. That's what I want. Right? So she listened to me talk for 90 minutes and I wasn't there, but she realized that's what I want. And so she became a client right away, which is great. That's from the podcast. And it's not that she found the podcast and then said, oh, this guy seems interesting, I'm going to sign up and learn more, right? It's just they already came to you from some other method, and you tell them, before we meet, why don't you listen to this or watch this video, whatever it is, so that you can learn a little bit more about what we do. And they'll walk in the door and they will have listened because they want to know what you're talking about before they even walk in your door. And they will say, I listened to your podcast. I loved it. That's exactly what I want to do. Or they might realize that's not what I'm looking for, and they might just cancel, and that's great. That's perfect. That's the biggest value of the podcast, is helping people that were introduced to you for some other way to just understand what it is you're about and how you'll be able to help them. And they understand that before you even get the chance to have your intake, your discovery meeting, connect meeting, whatever you want to call it. The other advantage of the podcast is I just hired a new advisor. His training is listen to 120 of my podcasts, like just The things I talk about, that's what we do with our clients. The way I talk about it, that's how you need to talk about it with our clients. And so it's a huge internal education piece. This is the way I'm thinking about and approaching things. That's the way my advisors need to think about and approach things. Or when a client asks my advisor, John, hey, tell me more about Medicare. He doesn't have to research it, think about it, create a response. He says, great, here's the page where Jeremy has 5 podcasts about Medicare. And he just sends it out to him. Took him 30 seconds. Client gets way more value out of it. Even myself, I don't have to rethink it every time. If once a month somebody asks me about Medicare, well, I just send them the exact Medicare thing. I had to think about it once, get it correct, and now everyone can make use of it.
So elated that you're talking about this because sometimes advisors will put out a podcast and they won't get any leads directly from it. And they'll be like, oh, this doesn't work. And, we'll talk with them and we'll say, or we'll ask, well, once you post the episode, what do you do with the episode, from there? And they're like, well, nothing. We just record another episode. And it's like, no, you spent all this time recording it, like leverage the heck out of it, share it all the time, Make your clients aware when you're in a client meeting. Hey, if anyone ever comes to mind, here's a link to the podcast, have them listen to that. And if they like what they hear, perhaps they'll reach out. It makes the referral ask a lot easier because you're referring a podcast, not referring to spend some time with someone right away. And to your point, it saves a heck of a lot of time. If someone has a question about, building out their COI network, we have a podcast and a blog on that. I share that out every single time. Those were created like 2 years ago. And it results in a much more efficient and productive conversation if they listen to those and read those things first. So I'm just happy that you're leveraging the podcast, in my opinion, anyways, in the right way.
Yeah. Another thing too is you do need to have some sort of lead capture. So the person that was referred to my podcast, right? Someone said, you should go check out Jeremy's podcast. It's Retirement Revealed. He went to it. In the middle of that is an ad that I cut for myself that says, you're listening to the podcast because I know you want to make great decisions about your money. I created a free video course to do just that. Go to 5stepretirementplan.com. You can use the number or spell it out, but 5stepretirementplan.com. I gave myself an ad, right? So when people go to 5stepretirementplan.com, that's when they give me their email and then they get the 5-step video course. And so when that in particular person, I saw the person come through and they had a email with Harley Davidson. We do a lot of work with Harley Davidson clients because they're local to Milwaukee. I'm in Milwaukee. And I saw the Harley Davidson email. So I thought, I know I've got a nurture sequence going on, which is good. I've got a 7 email nurture sequence going on. But I thought I'm just going to email them personally. And so I emailed them and said, hey, you reached out. How can I help? And that's when he wrote back and said, oh, Jim referred me to your podcast. So he got referred to the podcast and I had the lead capture and we had the nurture sequence going on. It all puts together. It all works together, right?
Yeah. Cause, without that, podcast isn't like Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, where you kind of know who's interacting with your content on those platforms. It just is, they're literally a number. They're a listener. They're a subscriber. So that lead capture is critical.
Yeah.
So I feel like I could talk with you all day. I think we had a pleasant surprise with the podcast conversation, even though we intended to do, just chatting about motivational interviewing. But before we wrap up, Jeremy, the book that you chose, you mentioned had an impact on you, is The Millionaire Next Door. Why'd you pick that book?
I picked that book, which I think is now a classic, right? It was probably the mid-90s when it came out. It just really turns the thoughts on the head of whatever you think it is about real wealth. Like you think fancy people and celebrities have real wealth. And when you do all the studies, the people that actually have wealth in the US are people that own a business, saved a lot of money, drive cars that are just normal, right? People worth $10 million driving a car that's the same worth as somebody that makes, 30 grand a year, right? They're married to their one spouse for 40 years. These are things that go completely against what you would expect of rich people. And that just, I don't know if I really thought about wealth and what it means to save and do well in America until I read that book. And I realized that's something that I want, right? I want to have real wealth, not just a flashy kind of wealth, but I also gives me an insight into the people that I want to work with. So I'm not an advisor that's joined a country club. Nothing against country club folks, but that's just not the crowd that I want to hang out in. And that's definitely not the crowd my wife wants to hang out in. She kind of still has it. She has this thought that flashy wealth is real wealth, right? Because that's just kind of normal on TV in America. And so it's just completely kind of a surprise to her when we go to a client event. We'll have some client events and like people dress completely normal. Like they shop at the sales like Kohl's and they have a 12-year-old car and then they drive away. I'm like, oh, that's one of our top clients. Like they've got, more money than 90% of our clients. It's just great. That's true contentment, is being able to just kind of accept what you have and doing the most with it.
And who doesn't like Kohl's Cash? I love Kohl's Cash.
Who doesn't like Kohl's Cash? Exactly. Yep.
Awesome, man. Well, if I'm listening to this show and I enjoyed it and I want to connect with you, where's the best place that I can go to keep tabs on what you're up to?
Yeah, if you want to hear my thoughts on retirement, go to Retirement Revealed for the podcast, or the website's retirement-revealed.com. And you can check me out on LinkedIn, Jeremy Keil, Keil, and you can find me there.
Awesome. Well, Jeremy, thank you so much. Jennifer, if you're listening to this episode, thanks again for reintroducing us. And for everyone listening, we appreciate your time, and we will catch you on the next episode. Have a great day, man.
Thank you, David.